Hey there.
Hi, Michael.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good here on a Friday afternoon in
Yeah.
Dallas.
Yeah. So anyway, Michael Hopkins, Director of Strategic Content for the Contributor and Community Content Team at Seeking Alpha. I have Jennifer Warren from Concept Elemental on the call or on the video interview today. Again, thanks for all the time today as well. The thing that we wanted to talk about today is you recently attended the conference from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas in Kansas City. They held their seventh Joint Energy Conference a couple of weeks ago in Houston. You attended that event. Can you give us an overview on that, what you brought back from that conference and some of the key items that were talked about?
Sure. First of all, so that was just last Thursday, and I flew down, and it was in Houston, and it was the Dallas Fed and the Kansas City Fed. And the panels, there was a geopolitical panel that sort of kicked it off, intermixed with some of the Fed presidents, like the Dallas Fed president, the Kansas City Fed president. And then there was after the geopolitical panel, there was experts discussing oil, gas, and renewables. Everything was oil, gas, renewables. They had to organize, this subject matter because, that's sort of, those are the large areas of in energy. And then the afternoon, there were ConocoPhillips, Tellurian, JP Morgan Chase talking about the energy sector, followed by executives talking, Shell, EQT, EDP Renewables, and then Pickering Energy Partners. So it was really a wide array of energy analysis from many points of view and top experts in the field. I mean, you just couldn't get all that in one place, so it's really heaven for me.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Um, So in those discussions that you had there, or you were part of there, I saw you answering asking the questions, engaging with those panelists. In the oil markets discussions, what stood out in your mind? What are the primary, and then when you think about what was talked about in that conference, and what's happening today with energy markets, what are the primary dynamics affecting the market? What should, investors know? What should just people looking at what's going on in these markets now?
sure, I'll talk a couple of minutes and then remind me, we'll switch over to look at a couple of slides on the oil market discussion, and then I'll stop that and we'll get back on, because I don't want to just like talk about slides. So some of the key dynamics are, there's a question of spare capacity, which means tight supply. There's still higher-ish prices anticipated, and I know you saw my Jay Hatfield video yesterday. In his range, they're modeling 85 to 105 is kind of what they're looking at. At the conference, I heard 110 to 120, hence, coming up. And it's so a lot, and that can also include some of the geopolitical uncertainty and potential spikes, because once these sanctions get, put on Russia, when they figure out whatever that price cap number is and everything, that could, increase some volatility, and we don't really know the response from Putin. Frankly, many thought, kind of the one consensus was that sanctions and the price cap are really not going to have a big impact. There can be reaction and volatility, but really that oil is going to flow, and that oil is going to go around the world, and it's going to get to markets one way or the other, by truck, by sea, by, land, by air, it's going to get there. And so it's just a matter of, what's Russia's price going to be. So that was the other thing. And then one of the drivers with this tight supply and higher prices is because of the impact of underinvestment, which sort of originated with ESG and just, the prospects of, trying to reduce supply. And so why should we be producing to meet, if we think our market is going to decline, we're not going to pump all out. And then there were other factors, with, the price drop sort of bust that happened as a result of, OPEC plus and all that. So there's kind of like a chronicle narrative related to that. So what and also just to point out, the talk is that there's really roughly 2 million barrels per day of spare capacity, which is not a lot. And given some of the uncertainty, that could cause some spikiness. But let's just, let me screen share and I'll show you a couple of these slides that I'm talking about. Oops, sorry. Those are my green ones. We're not going to do that first. Let me get to the, okay, so first of all, let me tee it up by saying, and this was, I thought, perhaps one of the big takeaway at the conference, and that was, or the event, that this is really cool. This oil market analyst, she was quite good, and she said, and this is sort of the thinking of, the administration and the United States and the Western worlds, and we want it to be one way. We want it to look like, oh, we're in this energy transition and, everything's going in this nice line, but it's really messy and it's really, you want it to be one way, but it's really another way. That was kind of her punchline. And that's really the truth. From our point of view, we see things the way we think they should be and how we want them to go. But here's some of the reality is, okay, we are one of the largest oil consumers and producers, and we've talked about that. We've talked about the powerhouse story, and we talked about it in our last discussion we had. But China's the largest oil importer. Asia has replaced Europe and the US as the primary customer for OPEC and Russia. And so you can see here on this chart that China crude oil imports by source, that blue part of the pie is, it's all China. We're not importing that much in the United States. And then Russia is another 15%. So OPEC plus is a huge supplier of China and Asia. So that speaks to influence. It speaks to customers and producers, just the relationship is changing. So that's one factor. And then on the tight supply issue, so this is sort of, so the orange is demand and black is supply. And as you can see here, we're here, let's look at Q4 22. So supply is potentially, a little less than demand with this fuel switching issue. What Jay Hatfield referred to in my video yesterday about, a shortage in general of BTUs. And so if you're short natural gas, in Europe, you're going to substitute other forms of oil, and that's, playing a role. Winter demand will play a role. So he said, everyone's all happy that, they've got storage, filled up on natural gas in Europe, but there's still the flow issue is, okay, if you get a cold winter, if you get some snaps, it could be, change those equations a little bit. So and so the demand impacts could go into 2023. Even if there's not a recession, this tight supply demand story imbalance still persists. It's going to take a little time to work out. And so that's kind of oh, I think let me see if there's one more slide. Oh, here it is, the spare capacity slide. I like this one. It's interesting. So at the high end, there's an estimate of 4 million barrels a day, but really the best guess is like 2 million. And these are the potential areas to look at for spare capacity. And, jury's out on what's going to happen with Russia as any form of spare capacity. So you might as well just count on Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So that's kind of the story on oil markets that that I gleaned, that kind of makes sense to me.
So they're looking out well into 2023 then, what could be happening with this key market.
Yes. And as we know, oil markets are a huge driver of everything. And it is the most watched priced commodity. Something else Jay said, it is the quintessential definition of commodity. It is 100% commodity. And that was something else. I don't have the slide up, but one of the panelists discussed that commodity prices are high in general. It's not just oil, it's natural gas, and it's other minerals. And that was before the war. So we're in this environment where all that's been happening. And now it's just like, when the war happened, that just kind of triggered increased awareness, but it was already happening. And now it's, there's more volatility surrounding it all. So,
yeah. So should we move on to the next one we want to talk about, natural gas?
Sure.
So what are some of the key observations or issues that struck you with natural gas? And it sounds like to me there could be opportunities here as well.
Sure. So it's so hard to focus because there was several hours per topic on natural gas, and each presentation that was 20 minutes has like, you could surround that with 4 hours of analysis and thought, just surrounding it. So it's a lot. But what I did pull out is that obviously natural gas grows. Natural gas grows because there may be increased renewable supply somewhat, but it's just not going to replace that. And B, you still have developing country growth, and natural gas is just one of the go-to sources for power generation, period. LNG, which is expected to grow, is the proxy for that around the globe, and that's expected to grow. And yes, we are a supplier, and that's a good thing. And I will show you, let's just look at this chart really quick. Put this back up. This is more a US story here. Here we go. So this is, now natural gas grows, period. I mean, total production in the United States. This is actually showing the regions, the change in the regions that are happening. And I find from an investor point of view, this one is most instructive. Because, so what it's showing here, so Appalachian is in the dark blue. And as you see here, in 2022, January, it sort of goes, it's not one of the drivers of increased production. It does come back here after, in the second quarter of 2023, but really who's picking up the slack is the Permian and the Haynesville. The Haynesville is this light blue. The Permian is this, kind of orangey color. And we discussed this, and I was talking about that the increased production, the increased oil production in the Permian leads to, associated gas production. That gas just happens as a result of drilling for oil. And that West Texas region we talked about last time in the Delaware, that's also considered a gassier region relative to the composition of oil and gas. Like the Midlands got more oil weighted generally. The Delaware is seen in this western part as a little bit gassier. So you just see kind of that play. And so I would say from a firm point of view, look at these Permian producers, the US E&Ps, and we looked at them last time on our talk. Go back, look at that chart, look at those names, just as a point. The JP Morgan Chase speaker was talking about some of the firms that are really not going to need to access capital markets at all because they're, with high prices, and they're cleaning up their balance sheets, they're reducing their debt, they're in good shape. And there are favored basins, and I've just mentioned two. And, so, and the integrated oil and gas firms, the majors and Permian focused firms have the best balance sheets now and going forward. So that's kind of I'm going to stop that. That's kind of an interesting takeaway, because that has implications for, what stocks one might want to look at.
For sure. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, so it's positive, it's a positive for the sector, and the sector is rocking it pretty hard, no pun intended, but the rocks. But so yeah.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of opportunity there, but there are some obstacles, there's some challenges. So what are the biggest drivers and obstacles in not only just with that, but when we're talking about things like the energy transition space?
Right. Okay, so one other thing I forgot is Tellurian, Tell. They presented, and Renee she's like one of their strategists or something. And there's on the Fed video event, there's you can watch that presentation. And so it's very instructive about LNG demand going forward, where the LNG projects are going to be. And here's an opportunity. 80% of all of the LNG facilities and plants and investment that are expected to be coming online, 80% are in the US because of our general economic and political stability relative to where these other LNG facilities that would have come online are not coming online, and that is Russia and Mozambique. So those are considered high political risk. We are not having high political risk, except for some of the challenges we have in the Marcellus with takeaway capacity. And that's that's a whole nother subject. I just haven't even gone there, because we're trying to stay in sort of macro land. So that's interesting about the LNG issue. And also there is, and I discussed this before with, my George Yates story, and that we are entering this new natural gas world, whereas before there were regional blocks. And now we have more of a global market. We have a convergence of pricing increasingly between the United States and other markets. You've got the Asia market, you've got the Europe market, you've got the US market, all different prices. And over time, that's expected to kind of converge more. We're in a good place generally in the United States. And and that's why there's a lot of interest in all kinds of investment coming here in general. I mean, manufacturing facilities, whatever, so there is that US as a powerhouse story, right? That's kind of like overlaying things. And, we're a stable democracy, even though we don't look like it sometimes, but with our elections and stuff. But generally speaking, relative to the rest of the world, so, and then what was the rest of your question? Oh, the energy transition, right?
Yeah.
Sort of what's the deal there? So just before I kind of get a little bit macro-ish, before I forget, one interesting thought from like one of the foremost minerals experts in the world, he mentioned that the battery story is kind of a key story. How everybody's talking about, well, with renewables, because they're intermittent, you've got to have battery storage so that you can get that, consistent power generation source, and, to store those resources because of intermittency issues. And so, it's battery storage to the rescue, right? But the battery storage is tough because of the inputs required to build those facilities. It's just, we talked about high commodity prices, and also the minerals needed for a lot of this is in opaque markets that have bad governance, and therefore there's a lack of price discovery. So there's a whole market that has to be created, to start making that happen in a more, efficient way. So that's just one element. And, you can argue all these a million different ways. Oh, well, we'll just start mining it all in North America. And, maybe, anyway, and also instructive with that, BHP just did I can't remember, it was an Australian firm. There was a very large transaction where they bought an Australian mining firm, and it was BHP. It was in the news like yesterday or something. And it just kind of grabbed my attention, just because, you will see more of this M&A, and I talked about it before. We've talked about it. And I said, you're going to get people, firms with a lot of capital that are going to start gobbling up the supply chain. I mean, scale is where it's at. It's where it's going to be in this energy transition, for one, if you're going to make it happen. And then to get to some of this, a little bit of the macro that I learned there, let me just pull up a couple of slides. Okay. Okay, here we go. So this is about, let me try to find my sheet. So what this is about is 3 different path scenarios over, the one scenario over the next 3 years here up to 2025. And then the next one is, 5 years following. And so this is the amount of investment required to get to net zero. And the green scenario is where there's a higher share of electricity in the energy mix and renewables growth. Okay. And so, we'd need like 1.7 trillion in the next several years. And then in the next 5 after that, it's 4.8 trillion to make all that happen. And that's even electrifying, starting to electrify the transportation industry some. And as you can see in the 5 years that follow, hydrogen plays a role. Hydrogen is really expensive, and there was a whole lot of talk about hydrogen in the conference, and I have not prepared thoughts or remarks on that, but if you ever want to get in the weeds with that another time, we could do that. And then the gray section here is where carbon capture, CCS, grows. And interestingly, it's the same amount of investment in the next few years. And then it grows to like 3.3 trillion, less investment required than the more renewable case. And that's interesting because that's reducing carbon emissions. So what it's saying is that CCS, is actually a little more capital efficient than, pushing renewables, which is an interesting thing. And maybe there's some meeting in the middle. And then the red section here is, 2.7 trillion. And this is in the high electrification and growth of nuclear. Nuclear is going to become one of the big sources, and you've got renewable but nuclear here, it's 2.7, to get that extra nuclear energy, we're going to have to spend. And then the next 5 years, it's 4.5 trillion. So it's what's interesting to me in the more electrification, more either the renewable path or the nuclear path, both, more expensive than the CCS path. So that's kind of interesting. And then the other, what I found interesting was, okay, so to get to, net, the energy economic transition scenario, or to get, to reduce to net zero practically, it's not just the power sector you have to decarbonize, which is the big blue, area. It's everything to get there, which is a heavy lift. So really what it's telling me is you're not going to get to net zero by 2050 unless there's some, big technology advance, not with how we're, even how we're intending. And then this line over here is kind of more like, I guess it was, if we're just kind of like going along as with our best intentions. So basically they're saying it's a really heavy lift to get to net zero. And something that was set, emphasized by some of these experts is that if you drive this net zero too hard, too fast, you just tank your economy, and we sort of saw a little bit of this, right, in Europe. It's, it's not tanking their whole economy, but it's certainly, the transition, and specifically Germany is kind of the poster child for this. It just was a little too fast, too soon, and their flank got exposed. Putin jumped in there, saw the vulnerability, and and then we have what we have. And so there's got to be a rethink of it all. And the fact that 82% of primary energy demand is met by fossil fuels, is this is the reality. And then you have this second reality of geopolitical world and how the world really works. And the money that we're spending on the Inflation Reduction Act, that was really interesting. I had a slide on that. I don't have it here, but that money, I think it's 380 billion or something, and towards energy transition, right? That's going to help. That's going to help move the needle. What sticks and who the winners are, we don't know. But it will be interesting, that's for sure. We're gonna have something to talk about for the next 10 to 15 years, Michael. But so that, any questions in any of that I just said?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you were going through the slides and you were talking about, this is going to be a big transition. It's going to take some time to do. Maybe it is too early to talk about what kind of opportunities might surface for investors when we talk about things like your thoughts on carbon, new outlooks for approaches. I mean, maybe it's too early to think about who might be winners, but maybe there could be some winners in this space.
Well, I haven't done real specific company level, due diligence. So, I never say anything about a firm unless I really, I
Yeah.
really, I know my stuff on it. And so, I mean, I do know that there are large firms, in the energy transition space, and you have the large integrated oil and gas companies all change, some of them changing their strategies more to become a big energy instead of big oil and gas, right? You see that with BP. You see that with Shell. Again, it's that different approach between US majors and European majors and everything in between. And actually there was and unfortunately I didn't flag that one. There's a really good chart that kind of shows where all these firms fall, in that XY axis of it all. And it's on that Fed video, which is going to be live until I think the 9th of December. And I'm trying to think what segment it was in. I can't remember, but it's one of the renewables segments. And I mean, we're literally today, Michael, we're only really covering just little snippets of things. I mean, we could do 3 of these just to kind of, get in the weeds about different areas. But I thought what was interesting though was Chevron. I thought, Chevron, and here's the other thing that's interesting about Chevron. So, I've seen this research, financial research, academic, that discusses bellwethers, and I'm about to interview on that next week. Chevron is like the number 4 of the S&Ps of all the firms in the world. Chevron is a bellwether in the industry. Exxon is actually, Chevron was like number 3 or 4. Exxon was, a little bit back. And what's interesting about Chevron is, they're very well run and managed, but they, they're all focusing on their competencies, right? Every oil and gas company in this energy transition space has a differentiated strategy based on their core competencies. With Chevron, they're all over the world, and they have some experience in sustainable fuels. They're not going to go and try to develop a lot of electric charging stations all over the world. That's not their strategy. BP's trying it, and maybe they're doing it in Europe, I can't remember. So I'm starting to look at, that's something actually I'm going to start looking at is, okay, with this knowledge, with these large oil and gas companies, or even mid-cap, who is doing things that I think make sense relative to how the tea leaves look in terms of the energy transition. And I think that's a really rich area for fishing, So like, for example, Occidental Petroleum. So Occidental Petroleum is a really good CCS play, Now, their direct air capture investment, I kind of heard that, the carbon price for that is really high, super high. It's not low-hanging fruit. And we need a low-hanging fruit carbon, carbon removal. And so that the price is real high on direct air capture, just going and like sucking it out of the air, with these big facilities. And it's really interesting looking, and maybe by doing it, you get secondary type innovation. And that was the other takeaway, is that we have to do it all. I asked the question about carbon. I said, we focus on carbon and everybody gets it, it's we attribute that to warming the planet because of all the science related to that. And I've read that stuff. But there's also methane, there's SOx, there's NOx, there's just pollution. And we know coal is just horrible on all that. And reducing pollution would be a very good thing to focus on, in any capacity. You can focus on carbon, and that's fine, but there are other ways to skin this transition, make the planet healthier, cat. So I sort of went off.
Oh, no, that's great. I mean, I think I think that was the last question that I kind of had here, was that, and maybe you can just summarize some of that with this last question here, but just summarizing your thoughts on carbon, new outlooks, approaches.
Sure. Well, with carbon, and I'm learning, I'm by means no expert, and I don't know that anybody has the carbon answer, frankly. But there are ETFs, there are carbon ETFs, and I'm invested in one, and it's by Cranes with a K. And I'm sort of watching that development. It's challenging because you have two counterparties involved. You've got, the emitters, and then you've got the offsetters, and you've got to balance all that supply and demand of offsets, and it's tricky, and there's going to be a lot of money thrown at this. There's going to be a lot of money wasted at this. And I do not have a really clear investment thesis on it yet. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around it more, and I'm doing some things that are going to help me get there. But it's right now, and this was well put by the analyst from Bloomberg NEF, is that it's all we got. It's what we know right now to focus on. And yes, there will be other things, and yes, there will be innovation, and we don't know what that's going to look like far out here, or maybe not so far out, who knows. Maybe Elon Musk has something up his sleeve, I don't know. So that's kind of my best thoughts. But basically, I think the comment about we would like to be here, but this is where we are, and we got to dream for sure, but we got to dream smart and do things that bring everybody along, where we are, and I think that's the big message, the big takeaway.
Cool. And so I'll just throw out just one last question. I want to tie it to that meeting, or that gathering in Houston. Was there something that you learned from that meeting, from that gathering? Was there something that you went, oh, I didn't think about that before?
That's a good question. Something
You need to throw that at you, but I thought, why not?
Yeah, something that I haven't thought about before. I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
Okay, here was something that was interesting. This is an observation, and actually the analyst or the strategist from TEL had this chart showing how she showed, how when ESG became more of a focal point, how the value of XOP, started reducing, and they kind of track each other. And so that was really interesting. And, yeah, you could say, oh, well, they're talking their book, but I thought that was interesting. Frankly, what is revealed is, okay, I thought the geopolitical panel, because the issue with geopolitics is such a huge overlay. And so I thought it was interesting how much I tracked with their thinking, relative to, some of the executives thinking. I think everybody's in their own operations and how it is impacted by everything going around them. And I think that there's just a myriad of opportunities. I think that's one big takeaway. It's bigger than I even see it. I think that would be something that I learned. It's like, this is, it's hard to know it all. It's impossible to know it all. You really have to pick and choose your battles about what you're going to do and what you're going to invest in, because it is really complex. And so you've got to find a way to view it, to analyze it, to get to, what's a good investment and where should I put my money? And I found a few, but there's others. I felt like the renewable story, had some really good arguments too, that, there's a narrative of, we're gonna, it's low density, it's this, it's that. Yes, but we also have to do it. We have to do it as well, just because of the carbon issue, just because of the pollution issue, so it opened my mind and eyes to more, I would say it expanded my thinking more, so.
And I apologize for putting you on the spot. It just feel like I think
That's a great question.
Yeah,
Should put me on the spot.
I just feel there's so many stories, there's so many different angles that come not just from that conference, but these bigger and larger conversations that we have about energy and where things are going. And it's such a long-term story that you just really can't look at it from a quarter. I mean, you have to look at it, like you said, maybe a decade out.
Yeah, and pick what you think's that looks like it's happening for reals for the next few years, and then readjust because it's going to change, right? And if anything, we saw with the geopolitical situation and with Russia, we saw how quickly it can change. I mean, these changes and this thinking has happened really fast. Russia invaded Ukraine, I think it was, what was it, the end of February, the third week, 24th, 25th, something like that. And look where we are now. We're in November. This is just like it's a bit of a moving train wreck for if you're Ukraine. And it's a train wreck for the European economy in some ways, and the people there. And so, I don't know where I'm going with that, because that just blocked everything I was thinking about. But I mean, it's
So many angles, so
it's
many
the
ways.
volatility, right? It's volatility. And but there's still the fundamentals, right, of energy demand, transition. That's happening regardless, and so there's a lot of noise, and so yeah, picking those companies that have practical strategies that look doable, that are capital efficient, because as we know, with interest rates rising, there are going to be projects that aren't going to make, and so that weighs into the equation of everything: renewables, new sources of oil and gas, so it changes the dynamic, and it makes us think more efficiently. We've got to be capital efficient with what we do as well, because it's not for free anymore. So
Yeah, another angle that when people talk about these markets is another thing they got to think about as well too.
yeah, absolutely.
So Anything else you want to add?
No, I think we covered it. Thanks for having me, and I enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm sure we'll do this again in the future.
Absolutely. Jennifer Warren, Concept Elemental. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.